First one, how long have you been coaching women's basketball overall?
I just finished my 22nd year overall, my third here at the University of Denver, but I've been coaching. It's been my only adult job since graduating college has been
Okay.
coaching women's basketball.
Okay. And so when did you realize you had a passion for it? It could be as far back as something that sparked your love for the game or even currently to where you are now or anywhere in between.
I think I was definitely passionate about basketball, probably like seventh grade, but in terms of coaching and wanting to do this for a living, probably twofold. I really enjoyed my high school coaches and honestly, before that, my middle school coaches, specifically Coach Jay, who was then the eighth grade coach at Chase Middle School. But once my love for college basketball, I was a ball girl for Washburn growing up. So to watch them, probably like seventh, eighth, and ninth grade, I was a ball girl. And I remember the one year they were undefeated and lost this like elite eight game at home that like everyone, took so hard. And I was like, wow, I was like, they were super passionate about it. But then it was like, a lot of crying and a lot of tears. So they really were my first introduction to college basketball, especially women's basketball. So fast forward to my senior year at Western Illinois, we had 8 freshmen and I was the only senior. So I always joke that was like my first year coaching because I had to coach them and play at the same time. But I've always had a passion for just, I always say ultimately like encouraging people. And then when I fell in love with basketball, I thought I'd be a teacher. Honestly, I thought I'd be like teaching junior English. I have a degree in English and that was kind of my passion. And I didn't know how I'd give up the game. So coaching gave me a way to combine both of that, my love of just kind of teaching and coaching. And then I didn't have to give up basketball.
Yeah. And so what are your now some of the fun ones? What are your hobbies or interests outside of work? What you do what you do for a living?
I love to read, give me a good hoodie. And as I mentioned earlier, I have a degree in English and then I like to write poetry. I pretty much will write about anything that inspires me a lot, like majority of it's maybe personal, my own experiences, but literally if I am, looking at something on Twitter or social media, I'm like, oh, I'm going to write about that. Or somebody, the team will joke because they'll say something and then like, oh, I'm going to write that down and write a poem about it. So I think I have about 100 poems on my phone. But definitely those two things. And then riding my Peloton. It's probably my biggest hobbies right now.
Okay. When you come back to Topeka, what's something you have to eat?
Oh, every time. Harold's Prize Package. Like it's still of all the places I lived, since leaving Topeka, I've lived in Illinois, Oregon, Louisiana, Colorado, Missouri. I've yet to find a burger to compare to that. So if you haven't been to Harold's Prize Package, I know it's on the east side, but I grew up like 2 blocks from that, 3 blocks from there. But yeah, Harold's Prize Package is a must.
Yeah.
Always a stop. Yeah.
I told you it was like kind of twofold for me again to kind of learn about the history.
Yes, if you like
as a
cheeseburgers,
foodie, yeah, this is great.
now you can't sit down. You have to call it. You got to call it in. You can't sit down.
Okay.
You have to call to get your little brown bag. It's going to be greasy, but it'd be worth it.
That's how you know it's good, right?
Yes. Yes.
All right. What's the last TV series or movie you watched?
Oh, okay. The last movie was like one of these little like Netflix, like pretend romantic, pretend comedy, Love in a Villa.
Yeah.
Which was, it came around at the end. So that, and then a couple of my assistants are into Love is Blind. So I started to try to watch that series. I'm not into, no, it makes zero sense. Yes.
Give it a shot though. You can't tell them that you didn't try,
Yeah. And I know the reunion just happened. Like, can I just skip to the reunion at this point? Because none of this is making sense. And there's no way that these couples, maybe one of them might make it, but so yes, but yeah, I'm really like give me like a little cheesy, like Netflix, just, mindless something, especially with how long the basketball is. I just want something mindless at some point. So Netflix is usually good for that.
Okay. And if there's always taking care of friends and family, of course, but if you won the lottery tomorrow, what's the first treat yourself purchase that you'd make?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably a trip to Maldives.
Okay.
So me and my spouse, we can go to Maldives. We talk about it a lot. So I was like, we'll have to save up for it. So if we won a lottery, we're not saving, we have the money. So we're going to Maldives.
Awesome. And so now And so I was at her signing actually earlier this week, and like I knew that Denver was in the running, so I was like, that's perfect if she happens to. And sure enough, she did. And so I was kind of asking her about that too. But first off, when did she kind of get on your radar? I know obviously there's that kind of Topeka area connection. When did Emari get on your radar?
Emery's one, I'm so proud of her story because, I know how it's going to look on the backside. People are going to see like, oh, you're from Topeka, she's from Topeka. But as I like to remind her parents, we're like from two different parts of Topeka, how I grew up and how she grew up. But I want to say in 2018 or 19, possibly, I hosted a basketball clinic at the Salvation Army. She attends Mount Carmel, the church across the street. So I kind of knew of her mom a little bit, but didn't know her. She ended up being a camper at that. And I remember joking then, the other person working the camp with me is Aqua, who's the head coach now at Lamar. Aqua was an assistant at Kansas at the time. But anyway, I remember Emory just kind of standing out because of her build. And I was like, oh, this is what I wasn't expecting this at the camp. It was like a little free clinic. It's Salvation Army. So anyway, we swapped information. I was like, just stay in contact. Like I literally do this for a living. And a lot of times people think, oh, when coaches say, oh, I'll help you, that is just being like facetious. But I really enjoy, obviously, if it's wherever I'm coaching, if that's the best fit, great. If not, then I just want a kid to go be happy. So she's one I kind of stayed in contact with. Well, she got injured her sophomore year, I believe. And then it was like a slow progress coming back. Well, the summer and last May, we go to a tournament, didn't realize she'd switched to AU teams. And so she literally was playing at the same time I was trying to watch this other kid. And I was like, oh, that's too bad. Like she didn't develop like I thought she would, but like we kept getting switched up. Well, that was May. July, not even kidding you, the same thing happens. July, again, you go last minute trip. I wasn't supposed to go, but ended up going to Iowa. And again, same thing happened. She's in the same pool as this other kid I'm there to see. So I'm watching, paying attention. We have elite camp in August and she comes and I'm just like, you have a ways to go because here's why, and kind of gave her some feedback. So actually sent out an assistant to Topeka to go watch her play. We're just like, I don't know if she's there yet. Well, then all of a sudden the season ends the season ends. And then she texts me like, hey, here's just some of my highlights. Now, mind you, the whole process I just took you through.
Yeah.
She sends the highlights, and I was like, who is this? Like, who is this kid? Because now she's healthy.
Yeah.
She's moving how, I envisioned her moving before. And we were actually recruiting a couple other kids. And I was like, you guys watch this highlight and let's like Emery's back on the table. So she gets back on the table and, obviously, everything kind of worked out after that, but it really just kind of came down to she's one. And when I say I'm proud of her story of just, sometimes it can be hard to hear some feedback. Sometimes it can be hard to hear like you're not ready. And I really give her a lot of credit. Like she didn't fold, she didn't quit, and she just kept working on her game to get better. And then I'm really big on, I like people who like us too, right? And people that want to be here. And so when she sent that last highlight, we were actually, further along with a couple other kids and or getting in that position. So it really just kind of gave me a chance. But what I like about her story is just the process that it took for her to get here, the process that it took for her to get the offer. We always kind of stayed in contact and things like that. So when it was time to offer her officially and like bring her out and treat her, I said, make no mistake, you definitely earned this, probably more so than a lot of people because of I feel like how hard I made her kind of like wait for it and work for it and really earn it. And that's what she did. She obviously college is going to be an adjustment, but I told her best basketball ahead of her. And I can't wait for me and my staff to be a part of that, just her growth as a player and more importantly, as a person.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you kind of mentioned earlier from East Topeka, born and raised, yeah?
Yes, East Topeka. And I like to specify because as you'll learn living in Topeka, it's obviously there's different parts of town and the expectations for those of us that grew up on the east side sometimes aren't as high as the other, and they try to put these limitations on you. It's the, when I was growing up anyway, the poor side of town or, low income, things like that. So it comes with a lot of added adversity. And so I like to specify just because whoever's like reading this or hearing this, like, I like to say I literally came from where you came from. I spent a lot of time on the east side when I come back, especially at Chase. I went to Lafayette Elementary, which is one of the magnet schools now that they eventually tore down. But I think it's important to just kind of be that role model for those who are from that side of town, because often sometimes the narrative is that's all you're capable of, right? Oh, you're from East Topeka, and then it kind of comes. So I like to specify, yes, I'm from Topeka, more specifically East Topeka, born and raised.
Yeah. Yeah. You're a multi-sport athlete at Topeka High, graduated in 1997.
Yes, yes. Played basketball all 4 years, volleyball all 4 years, softball all 4 years, and then track and softball at the same time. So I did track for 2 years. I really would just show up for the meets to kind of get points because of softball practice. But yeah, I was super active in sports, pretty much whatever I was allowed to. It was honestly a way for me to stay out of trouble.
Mhm.
And then I was also all school vice president my senior year. Justin Ramirez was president. He had passed away right after graduation, like our September of our freshman year of college. But he was a big basketball star on the boys' side. Was actually walking on at Kansas like the week after he found out is when the car accident happened. So, but yeah, I was an actor pretty much in student government, anything that could keep me honestly out of the streets and distracted, just because I was born and raised with a single mom who was trying to raise 3 kids who had some limitations of her own. So sports was a way for me to kind of stay focused. And then especially becoming the ball girl at Washburn, realizing that I could, if I worked hard enough, I can, literally use this as a ticket to kind of get to college. So anything that kept me out of trouble, I was part of.
Yeah. And so you started playing basketball in middle school?
Yes, seventh grade, we played like a little bit. East Topeka Junior High, which is not far, it's closed down now, but they used to have like a boys league or a men's league. And so my best friend at the time, Kizzy, we'd always kind of go and like, oh, we're gonna be the halftime show. We didn't really play anything organized, but we would just go watch them shoot around. Well, then once we got middle school, we could play organized basketball. And honestly, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just fast, and I used to shoot the ball with 2 hands. And if you had the ball, I could take it. Like that was like the simplicity of it.
Yeah.
And then in 8th grade, Coach Jay, well, actually, like 7th and 8th grade, we practiced together, but she started introducing me to leagues on the other side of town. Like I didn't know, honestly, past the Capital Journal, I didn't know there was that much Topeka because we never really left the east side. If we couldn't walk, we didn't go.
Smart,
So
man.
yeah, so it was like, oh, basically, you get to the bridge and like don't cross the bridge was kind of like my mom's rule. But once I got middle school, she started literally paying for me to play, have normal shoes. I would just kind of play in like whatever. So she'd get me normal shoes, and then she'd like take me to Washburn Rural to play like I think it was like TYB, Topeka Youth Basketball League.
Okay.
That it kind of gave me some different type of exposure. But yeah, 7th grade is where I really had an opportunity to start playing organized basketball. And even now, it's funny, we're doing this interview and I leave today to go watch like a bunch of travel ball AAU tournaments. And I tell our athletes now, I never did that because summers was my softball time. I played softball in the summer. So I never played any of these types of tournaments that I spent all the energy. I would play on Sunday nights on the Washburn League if we got back in town in time. Other than that, I didn't play basketball in the summers.
Yeah. And so what's I mean, you wouldn't have kept playing it. I mean, knowing that you played with those other sports, you could have used any time off. It sounds like with such a busy schedule, so you wouldn't have played it unless you still really liked it. What you what kept you with it? Because you talked about a little bit like the simplicity of it. If you had the ball, I could take it. But as you kept playing it and more got the skills, what stuck about the game?
Yeah, I think, I always liked being a part of a team. I think I liked the whole idea of, when we first got together, how we looked and how we basically had zero chemistry to by the end, whether we were winning games or not. I always enjoyed the process of it. People think I wasn't ever like, the best or this, like the best athlete in Topeka or the best athlete even at Topeka High. But I think what a lot of people would say is I was always, I'm pushing like 5'3", 5'4" on a good day. But I always played with a ton of passion. But I liked what the game provided me in a sense of that competitive, in a place of belonging. I think when you grow up the way that I did, hardships in a lot of different areas on the basketball court gave me a chance to block out a lot of outside noise and just be free. It was probably one of the few places growing up that I felt like I could just be free and nothing else mattered. The only thing that mattered is if I had the ball, I need to try to score it. If you had the ball, I need to try to take it. And, some of the hardships that we experienced at home or just life in general didn't exist on the court, because for that, 2 hours, we all are trying to do the same thing. And we all are
Yeah.
there doing the same thing, right? It didn't matter where you came from or what you had at your house. Like we're all on this team trying to do one thing. So I always like that idea of it, but really the sanctuary that it provided me from just the childhood hardships that I dealt with.
Yeah. Yeah. And so during middle school, you kind of touched on as well, getting that opportunity to hang around the Washburn women's basketball team. You alluded to that earlier, kind of what that experience kind of meant to you. I mean, how did that opportunity come about?
Back then, NCAA used to have this program called NYSP, National Youth Sports Program, and they would basically target a lot of inner city, maybe, I don't know if there's like Title I, Chapter 1 schools, but basically those of us who were getting free lunches. And it was about a 6-week program where the bus will pick you up at your middle school or your elementary school, whichever one you live close to. We'd go to Washburn, and every day you'd have a couple sports sessions, whether it's basketball, golf, tennis, softball, and then a couple like kind of classroom sessions. And then when we would go, Coach Dick, who was the coach then at the time at Washburn, she ran the whole program.
Okay.
So she ran the whole program. So I went a few years as a camper myself, and really, again, it gave me a chance to just really get on a college campus. I didn't even know Washburn was in Topeka at the time. Well, a lot of their athletes then worked the camp. So to then, meet, I remember she had a point guard from Alaska at the time, Shauna Augusto. And I remember she's like, oh yeah, I'm from Alaska. I'm like, well, how'd you get here in Kansas? So it really kind of became this extended education. So once that connection was made in the summer, I remember like the whole team almost, I became like a little sister to them. I remember one game in middle school, we were at Robinson, and like 3 of the players show up to my game. It was like the last, last 5 minutes of the game. And I was like, you guys came to watch me. But because of that connection in the summer, Coach Dick really just let me hang around the team, be the ball girl, come to practices. I started going to, pregame. Now that I'm coaching for a living, and I tell her all the time, the amount of times she let me be around the team, and like, why? Like, I'm at pregame. Like when I think now, like if somebody was around as much as I was around that team, like they were just phenomenal. And I'm in contact with quite a few of them today, thanks to like social media, and it just amazes me now. But I think, and I tell them all the time that I really wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them, because of the way that they worked so hard all the time. So I never really knew any other way, how to play hard or work hard, because I don't know if there was a time I wasn't. And then the passion is to be able to be in the locker rooms, like after wins or after losses. I'm like, and that's why, I remember in high school, I would take losses. We didn't win at a time, but I'd take losses so hard because I'd been watching them, right? And it's like, you're not like used to losing, but NYSP and Coach Dick just kind of working that camp. And then what was also what I wouldn't say most proud of, but what also excited me was once I started being in college myself, I spent my summers then being a counselor at that same camp. So to have some of those same experiences and be able to relate to those boys and girls that would go. And I remember even some of them today, we're still in contact, and a lot of what they've been able to do in their lives, this is their words, that they were inspired by just me playing basketball, coming back. And it was definitely a highlight of my summers when I was in college.
Yeah. And so, yeah. And so you graduated from TI in 97, you played collegiately at Barton Community College and then Western Illinois before getting into coaching?
Yes. Played at Barton County for 2 years. And it was my first time like past Topeka for anything. So to get to that part of Kansas, I was like, am I still in Kansas? I thought it was somewhere else, because that's like a whole, I tell people I'm from Topeka, but like Great Bend and Western Kansas is just like, I'm not saying it should be a separate state, but it's just different, right?
Yeah.
But I had a blast. I absolutely had a blast being at Barton for 2 years. I learned so much about myself, and I met so many different types of people that I didn't anticipate meeting. Really got that first introduction to international. We had a couple international athletes, both on our team, on the men's team, on the track team. The track team was really good at the time. And then leaving there, I went to Western Illinois, played there for 2 years. And then again, same thing. Neither one of those experiences I would trade. You get to places where it's what you need at that point in your life. And both of those, that's what they provided. Both Great Bend and Macomb were great for what I needed personally. I remember leaving Barton, and I visited Western and I visited Houston. And this is like pre-social media, pre-cell phone days.
Mhm.
So when I left campus, everybody's like, oh, you're basically going to go to Houston. So by the time I make it back, and I told them like, oh, I committed to Western, basically at the airport when I was leaving Houston.
Mm.
And they were like, what? And it was just like, it was something I was always really like, what made sense for me. I've always been that type of person of like not being distracted by what everybody else is doing, but I knew what I needed. I knew what they were looking for. And I wanted an opportunity to kind of help build a program. So to do that for 2 years there, and then to work there for 3 years after I graduated and us winning the league back to back, I felt like, and I would tell the team all the time, you don't win the league if we don't come here and lay the foundation, right? That those of us that before. So it's something that I'm super prideful for. But just my start, just obviously earning a degree, and then my start coaching as well.
Yeah. What was that the first year you began coaching?
Right after grad, so 2001. So I
Okay.
was a GA for about a month, and we had a coach take a job in like September. And I remember coach saying, I need to fill this spot. I know you're supposed to be a GA, but would you like to be an assistant? And I've always, when I transferred to Western, I told her I want an opportunity to coach at that level and whatever it was going to take. So when she offered me, I was like, oh, absolutely. So I remember my first paycheck, because I was also on Pell Grant. I'm like, I have a whole Pell Grant check in 1 month. Like I couldn't even process like that kind of
Yeah.
math. So,
Yeah.
uh, but no, so that was 3 years, and it was really a good transition because obviously I knew the town, I knew the system, but to kind of have that time and patience to learn what it meant now to be a coach and to have that separation, coach provided me the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And so when was you can, if you look out at from somebody who might not know, like that might seem like a natural progression, right? Like playing your whole life and then getting into coaching. Was coaching something that you always envisioned yourself doing? When did you kind of know coaching was something that was kind of got on your radar?
Yeah, no, I was never one of those people like in women's basketball, especially, it's big to say, oh, I want to try to play professional, especially overseas. That was never really me. I wanted to have a good college career, as I felt like I had. And I think if you made me kind of like pick probably maybe probably my sophomore year, maybe in high school, I started to think, oh, could I do this? You know, I want to be able to coach. What does that mean? And then when I transferred to Western and Coach Crane, who's now coaching at a junior college in Kansas, I remember her saying, I've never had a GA, but I think you have a lot of like natural leadership. And so it was really getting there and her starting to give me the opportunity to learn that other side. But my sophomore year in college, it was like, I knew then I just wanted to be able to play basketball in college. But my ultimate goal was to be able to coach basketball in college.
Hmm. And so then you had those long stints at you had stops in Mexico State, Oregon State, and Missouri before
Yes.
Tulane? Okay, so
Yes.
I know you said you worked a few years after Western Illinois. When was your first job after that? Which one was it, and what year?
So I worked 3 years at Western, and then I went to New Mexico State for a year. That was just like a quick year. And then Oregon State for 3 years, University of Missouri for two. And then where I spent a bulk of my time was 10 years at Tulane,
Mhm.
where I ended up finally getting my master's in COVID. So in 2020 is when I got my master's from there in May. And then I got this job here at DU in July of 2020. So yeah, that's pretty much been, I graduated from Western in 2001 in July
Mhm.
and started work in September there in 2001.
Man, that's a quick that's a crazy that's a whirlwind. Like I mean, what titles did you were you all what titles did you hold at those schools? Was it all assistant coach?
Yeah, so I was an assistant for 19 years total. And
Mm.
after leaving, so my 3 years at Western and 1 year at New Mexico State. So then the other years, every year after that, so both Oregon State, University of Missouri, and Tulane, I was recruiting coordinator at each of those places.
Okay.
And knowing what I know now to be a recruiting coordinator at like 26 at a Power Five school, I was just trying to keep my head above water, but it taught me so much that I was able to then obviously get another opportunity, but really kind of hone my skills for the 10 years at Tulane. So those 19 years, I was an assistant at a bulk of those, being a recruiting coordinator.
Okay. Getting to be about 10 minutes here, so I'll be a
Oh,
little bit
you're good.
short, so I apologize. So I mean, with that long stint at Tulane, that 10-year span before you became head coach here at University of Denver, I mean, what led you to sticking around there a little bit longer rather than some of the shorter stints before? What did you like about Tulane?
Well, I think it's hard to pass up like just New Orleans and like the warmth and the food and the culture. But Lisa Stockton, who is still the head coach there, just honestly became a really great mentor. She gave me the opportunity to grow outside of just being the recruiting coordinator. I coached the guards there. So working there for so long, it really gave me opportunity to expand just my own profile in a sense of prior to, I was just known as a recruiter. There, it gave me a chance to do financial aid, to do housing, to do compliance, to do a lot of other things. So by the time this position became available, I think I had done virtually everything except maybe literally everything. I don't know if there's an area that I hadn't done travel.
Hmm.
Maybe that's been the only thing that I hadn't done in all those previous stops. I've done scheduling, I've done camps. So, but staying at Tulane, it gave me a chance to have some stability and to work for somebody who gave me some flexibility to learn different areas and not limit me to just being just a recruiting coordinator or just a guard position coach.
Yeah. How did the opportunity? I know you're a few years into your career here at Denver. How did this opportunity come about?
You know, really, Denver's always been a job. Let me back up. So prior to Tulane, I worked at a lot of public schools.
Mhm.
Tulane was my first private school kind of experience, and I started to enjoy that. I started to like, just the balance of academic life and athletic life. And this is, I'm saying this as a person who went to JUCO first, and then like went to public school myself. But I started to appreciate kind of just that private school setup. So I was super selective leaving there, leaving Tulane, about where I wanted to go, where I wanted to live. All of these boxes had to be checked. And when this position became available, I'm like, okay, it has the academic piece that I've learned to embrace. Obviously, athletically, feel like we have a chance to compete in the Summit League. And then a lot of parts, people don't talk about the social part, right? Like when you're not playing basketball, what are you doing with yourself? Well, I want our athletes and myself and my staff to have something to do. And Denver's a great city to do that. So in the pandemic, when it started, it was about a 4-week process. And, you try to kind of tap into your networks, things like that. But I really just tried to hit home that the 10 years that I was able to spend at a school that's very similar, DU's private as well. We don't have football here. Tulane have football. So I try to hone in on a lot of those things that I'd already been doing. And not that there wasn't more left for me to do, but I spent so long as an assistant that I felt like the next step then was to have the opportunity to lead my own program.
Yeah.
And I think my experiences at Tulane really set me up for here. And you try to, again, I didn't have an agent when I got this job. It was just like call around, ask a few people, and at least try to get my name on the radar.
Yeah.
And then I think once the interview process started, I'm like, okay, it's on you to close it or not.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I did, because it's been a great fit.
Yeah. And you talked about kind of all your experiences being besides like travel, you've done pretty much everything that it entails. And so, but I think there's the old saying, you don't know until you know. So what was it like once you actually kind of took over the program and now kind of having that actually head title coach? What was different?
I felt I spent 19 years preparing for this opportunity, attending different conferences. I grew up a diehard Kansas Jayhawk men's basketball fan.
Mhm.
And I remember when Jerome Tang got the job at K-State last year, I made this post like, I'm going to become a K-State fan because him and I go way back. But in 2013, we both did this assistant coaches that want to be head coaches kind of program. And
Hmm.
it was like a 3-day workshop where you had like on court things, a mock press conference, all these different areas, right? Preparing you for this.
Yeah.
And I say that to say nowhere in that did it prepare me for getting the job in a pandemic on a team that had some culture issues before the previous coaches put on leave in January. And then I get the job in July. So it gave me a chance to just, and then also obviously being in a pandemic where now you're COVID testing 3 days a week, you're playing non-traditional schedules. So I personally like COVID where it gave me a chance to really figure out what type of head coach I was going to be. I had limitations that the mentors that I had before really couldn't help because in Denver and in Colorado, what our policies were very different than New Orleans and Louisiana. So it's hard to like reach out to people. So it forced me to kind of get creative and learn how to pivot. That was my favorite word in the pandemic, because, hope that if we got to play a game, I was excited.
Yeah.
But I think it taught me a lot. then for those first 2 years. That's why this made year 3 so exciting. On paper, you'll say like, oh, we haven't made a ton of progress. But if you were here with us that first year from COVID to what we have now and the pieces that we have. So, but I knew this was going to be a good fit. Honestly, I took the job before I even seen the school because everything was done on COVID and you couldn't go anywhere. But the administration really sold, and it was one of the few places that I felt like who I was as a person was what they were looking for, who I was and what I could bring to the table, not just athletics, but just to the whole university. And I've tried to dive headfirst into a lot of those areas, but I think being in a position where they were able to express that, Lynn Coots is the one who is still my sports supervisor, who ran the search. And I think in that process, kind of expressing, obviously you'll win games eventually, but here are the characteristics that we're looking for. Their values matched up with my personal core values. And I thought, the rest of it should be easy, right? And it hasn't been the easiest, but at least the values of what we both are looking for, being excellent in areas and being able to coach the full person, not just them as players, but them as people, has always been a personal goal of mine. So those two things matched up, and it's been fun so far.
Yeah. I'll make sure I didn't miss any. We got a few minutes left. We're doing great. Yeah, that does it for me. I appreciate you. Well, I mean, you mentioned you're going out to some tournaments later today, so I appreciate it. The grind never stops on any given day, especially for any coach. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Let me get to know you a little bit more.
No, I appreciate you asking, and anyone will tell you, I'm definitely very prideful of just Topeka and having the chance to kind of, give back, any of those things. If there's somebody or someone in Kansas, especially in athletics, I'm pretty much going to at least know of them. If I don't know them, I will teach myself about them, because I will hype up a Kansas person 9 times out of 10, especially if I don't have to compete against them.
Yeah.
If I got to compete against them, it might be different. So.
Right. Right. Well, I appreciate the time again, and best of luck this coming season. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, South. Appreciate it.
Yeah.